Hey, I just wanted to make a quick video today just to riff a little bit on some uh, information from an interview as well as a rumor concerning Sony and Microsoft that has come out today concerning their gaming brand. So we have an article with an interview with Mark Cerny of PlayStation talking about some new tech they're using and things that are definitely in the works for the future, as well as a rumor about Xbox's next couple bits of hardware. So, first, we have this article from Eurogamer. It's an interview with Mark Cerny. As many of you would know, he's kind of the head of tech there at PlayStation. PlayStation doesn't quite have like customer facing personalities like Xbox does with like Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond and so on. Mark Cerny is probably the closest thing they really have to that now. And the big thing is this announcement about how the PS5 Pro is going to be implementing the new FSR4 tech. So if you're not super into tech, I won't even pretend to be an expert, but I know enough to talk about it. Long story short, if you've heard of like NVIDIA's DLSS, it's this tech that does a lot of things, but one of the things it does is it upscales. So say you have like 720p, which is fairly low resolution in today's standard. Uh, this upscaling tech can take that and blow it up to like 4K, and depending on how good the tech is, it can look good or bad. What this tech can also do is basically take like 30 frames per second footage. So there's, every second you see 30 unique frames. And it can basically create or make up a frame in between each one based on the two frames to boost it up to make it look like 60 frames per second. And technically it is, but not really. So NVIDIA's been leading in this big time with their DLSS tech. AMD has a similar tech called FSR that is trying to do similar stuff, but it's been pretty far behind. But the most recent version of FSR is FSR4, which is being used on the new 9000 series graphics cards that AMD just put out. And apparently, some of that tech is going to be able to be basically put back to the PS5 Pro. Now, when we're talking about the RDNA, that is the generation or the architecture used by AMD's graphics cards. So the PlayStation 5, the base console and the Slim, as well as the Xbox Series X and S, use RDNA 2. It's pretty dated at this point. Those consoles, even though they're not that old, they are tech wise. What's really the most probably impressive thing about the PS5 Pro is that it has RDNA 3.5 tech in it. So it's pretty substantially generation wise far ahead of the base consoles, but it's not quite RDNA 4. It doesn't have all the tech that the newest graphics cards have, but it is pretty impressive. And that's why they've been able to do some of the things they're doing with this PSSR. So PSSR is PlayStation's version of FSR or DLSS. So if you're still with me, what we found out today in this interview, or at least what I took from it, is a couple things. The one is that it sounds like PSSR is basically just FSR, and that's I believe been kind of assumed by a lot of the tech sources I've watched, even if they haven't really just come out and said it. It seems like that's what it is. Sony and PlayStation have been really playing up this amethyst kind of code development situation they have with AMD, where they're both working on this. I'm assuming really the main reason they're even calling it PSSR and not just FSR is because they're having to make essentially a unique version of FSR just for PlayStation, because for the PS5 Pro, because it doesn't have the full AMD tech that they would expect to have on their GPUs. So, and that's what's happening here. And it's actually kind of neat what they're doing is, like I said, the RDNA 4 GPUs that AMD just released, like in the last week, fully use FSR4. They have it full featured because the PS5 Pro can only do it's only RDNA 3.5, so it's a not fully featured, and it's older tech in general. The whole console is. They're basically doing like backwards engineering to take a bunch of the FSR4 tech and see if it'll work on the PS5 Pro. It's cool. It's a neat idea. And what I'm most curious about, and the other thing about this is I'm really curious to what this means in the future. We're in a situation where the PS6, PlayStation 6, is probably 3 or 4 years away still, to my estimation. I don't think that, especially after they did this mid-gen refresh with this PS5 Pro, I don't think they're just going to rush out and put out a PS6 next year or even the year after. Where we'll talk about Xbox in a minute, they may be trying to do that for their own reasons. So what I'm assuming is that this is just part of their development and trying to implement this. Now, by the time even the next Xbox or the next PlayStation comes out, I assume FSR4 won't be the current tech. It'll probably be FSR5 or 6 or whatever we're at. What I'm most curious about is if by the time the PS6 comes out and it's the newest tech, maybe it's RDNA 5, right? If will they just call it FSR, or will they keep up this PSSR kind of facade almost? Because, and we'll talk about this in a second, the next Xbox will likely have FSR and whatever the newest version of it is when it releases. Now, depending on release dates and all of that, timelines and everything, maybe the next Xbox will have RDNA 5, and the next PlayStation, if it comes out 2 or 3 years later, will have RDNA 6. So maybe they won't cross anyways. But the thing about FSR is it's not exclusive to Sony. This PSSR, which seems like it's basically just modified FSR, is kind of their way of like acting like they have their own thing when it kind of seems like they probably don't, even though it is unique to their hardware because of that hardware specification. So I just thought this was really interesting. I think what they're doing with that is neat. You're only seeing first party PlayStation studios implementing this PSSR tech and definitely this newer version of it, because really there's no reason for third parties to. The best numbers I could put together is that maybe 3 or 4% of current gen consoles are PS5 Pros. It's just a couple million basically. That's just not worth it to third party studios who are trying to implement all these different versions and all these different platforms of everything. Already implementing FSR is hard enough on this old hardware at this point. And then, for this little tiny niche of their player base to do it, it's just not happening with third party. And then even in the future, I'm curious to how this plays into PlayStation's handling, where by the time the next console comes out, if FSR, say 5 or 6 is the standard, you would think that third-party studios and publishers would kind of pressure PlayStation and say like, hey, can you please not do your own thing? Can you just do the thing that we're doing for every PC user and even Xbox player at that point? But we'll have to see. Sony will continue to have a lot of pull, and we'll see what they do with that. The other part of the story is rumors today from Jez Corden that Xbox will be releasing a partner handheld this year in 2025, and then plans on their next hardware to replace the Series X and S to come out in 2027. There's been rumors about both of these things for quite a while. I think a lot of people kind of assumed the handheld was actually much further off, and maybe another handheld is. It kind of seems like right now they're in a situation where they may put out a handheld this year with a partner, likely one of the big, Asus or something like that, that will use proprietary operating system. I would imagine that would basically, I assume, be the Xbox operating system on a handheld, which to me is like the perfect scenario. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. And then the rumor of the next set of hardware coming that's supposedly in full production right now. That doesn't mean manufacturing. It means, and we heard this news a while back, that they've probably settled on design, hardware, all of that. They're going to be putting it together, concepting out likely what the hardware is going to look like and all that stuff. And then I assume next year in 2026, probably start manufacturing it to prepare for a 2027 release. Maybe. The handheld is the more interesting thing now because it's potentially coming out this holiday. For me, I don't necessarily need it the way other people have said, where I don't really need the next Xbox hardware, if it's a handheld, to be like a Windows machine. I would rather it just have Xbox OS on it. And for it to have access to my entire library. I don't need it to be 4K 120 FPS. I would take 900p 60 FPS. That'd be perfectly fine with me. that's probably still going to be challenging with some games. We'll have to see how they handle that. And the price, like that's going to be the tough one probably. To get what I want, it's probably going to be 400 or 500 bucks, which is going to be hard to swallow for a lot of people who may not want to pay that much, or may just want to get a Steam Deck instead, or one of the other options out there. So really curious about that. I still think it would be smart for them to try to get new hardware to replace the Series X and S out in 2026, but all of the signs are starting to point to 2027, which still would make sense. And I imagine we'll still be a year or two ahead of what PlayStation is going to do with their new hardware. And I think as we go on, we're just more and more seeing the end of the generation concept when it comes to these gaming platforms. I truly believe that we're going to see, we have Nintendo releasing hardware that likely is only going to be as powerful as maybe the current gen hardware, and maybe not even that. We have PlayStation that's probably still the furthest out from their next hardware, but they have this mid-gen refresh that they're working on right now. And then Xbox doing their whole thing with de-emphasizing hardware entirely, and potentially still releasing new hardware in the next year or two, maybe even this year with a handheld. We're all over the place. This is actually kind of what I love about covering this stuff. I think it's really interesting. I don't really love seeing the takes from other people on it because it becomes so clickbaity and all that. I just like seeing tech advance, and I think we're just in a really interesting area for gaming right now, and seeing all the moves being made, and some of the platforms being more traditional and sticking to their what they've always done, and some platforms trying new stuff. I think it's interesting. Without going into any console war stuff, I just think it's kind of fun to cover. So let me know what you think about all this. If I asked anything, or if I said anything wrong in there, please let me know in the comments. If I was actually wrong, I'm happy to admit it. If you like this video, if you want more gaming news, whether it's about PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo, follow the channel, subscribe, hit that thumbs up so more people see the video. If you really want to support what I do, consider becoming a YouTube member, where you get videos like this one a little bit early, as well as a bunch of other perks. If you want to see all of my other content and other ways to support, check out the links in the show's description. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.